Here we go over one of our last EMS operations categories and presentations. We're going to go over this disaster response. We went over a little bit about some individual type of disasters and responses that we go to. You know, the tactical type response. We have high terrain, low terrain. We have confined space. We have hazardous. We have chemicals. Well, we're going to move into this disaster type response where it's overwhelming. It's not just a particular incident where we have multiple casualties, but an incident that it's a larger span, a larger mass, and a larger footprint on the entire resources that we have, and we may end up having to draw additional resources and ask for support and services from state agencies, far beyond our local agencies, and all the way up to our federal agencies. And we are tasked again through a presidential directive to have these types of plans already set up in our disaster response plans. It goes back to having preparedness. So a lot of us have gone through some initial training. Usually it's some type of online course. Then we get a classroom and tabletop exercises that we continue to learn from, and eventually we end up doing these type of field exercises, and we end up doing these post-event or post-action, after-action reviews after our post-events that we go on. So it's all about being prepared, making sure that we know about these plans, know about our response capabilities, know about the resources that we have, and how and when we can deploy, and how and when we can stand these resources down is important. So it goes back to the planning and planning activities. Now, a lot of time at the operator level, we're not necessarily developing the plans, but we're learning about these plans, and in these areas we're learning how to implement these plans. And we go through training and more specialized or advanced training, and somehow these plans then become part of our operating protocols, our standard operating procedures. Most of our plans, we want to be in this all hazards approach so that we're not really stovepiping or creating multiple little response plans to handle this disaster profile. When we think about it, we want to have a disaster response plan that handles all types of hazards, including natural and man-made. That falls back under a National Incident Management System, our NIMS courses, which we are using at the federal level, and it's all the way down to our lower levels and local government. And we are going to be implementing the incident command for that particular situation or incident. But as we move forward and we see biological, chemical, and nuclear on the bottom of our board, this may cause us to have multiple events and multiple incidences. And it's not simple to just have 4 or 5 different incident commanders running at different incidents. We want to have specialized tactical resources to handle and funnel everything back in, so that we're really operating with our real-time data from our surveillance equipment and our dispatch, our CAD systems, our responding elements, our hospital systems. We're taking all this data and we're trying to hopefully organize our response, and our incident command becomes more of a national incident management system, maybe even at our local community area, augmented by state officials, or maybe even covered by our state, and then allowing the incident to be locally managed at the local level and community levels. But we'll go over a little bit about our biological, chemical, and nuclear, as these are the events that have a grand scheme on becoming a really immense hazard to the entire public or entire communities. Some of the chemicals that I put up here, we have hydrogen cyanide and phosgene and chlorine. These work on our respiratory centers. They either stop you from allowing oxygen exchange, they cause you to choke and make it difficult for you to breathe. Anhydrous ammonia, we want to get these guys out of that environment, provide them 100% oxygen, and looking at minimizing the contaminants. But we're looking at these choking agents. They can cause a lot of necrosis going on. Mustard and nerve agents, as we move forward, will have more specific antidotes that we look at. And when we're looking at our nerve agents, this is something that we hope never hits our civilian population. But we do plan and train for this event because we know that the world now is not as peaceful as we once thought it would be. So some of us have seen and are aware of our chemical antidote kit, which is atropine and 2-PAM chloride. This is anticholinergic, as well as you have a binding material, as well as another type of auto-injector, which is Valium. And these are usually deployed for rescuers that are responding to an event. You want to deploy and take these auto-injectors every 5 minutes. Once you enter into a system, and then you continue taking these based on the symptoms that you're having. But once you start having these symptoms, you want to deploy these antidotes as immediately as possible. We want to also identify on our rescuers that we've deployed these countermeasures on that they have received at least this initial basic treatments. Biological events, I have a few up here. We are being charged by the community and the National Health Associations. We are being charged to manage these situations because we have personal protective equipment. We've been trained how to don these personal protective equipment. Your mask, your gloves, your respirators, your foot coverings, your hoods, your head coverings, everything. These do have the opportunity, these biologics have the opportunity to infect, and they're very virulent. They may be able to infect the responders and medical responders that respond to these incidents, but they're hoping that with our training that we're able to manage these types of disasters because we are able to take a protective posture that is required to handle these. And a lot of times it's not having like the full-on level 1 fully contained, vapor contained, splash contained, self-contained breathing apparatus, which is what sometimes we end up seeing, on TV. But we should be able to protect ourselves from this type of aerosolized exposure type with just our kind of suits, gowns, gloves, N95 mask, hoods, foot protection, and being able to put this on, take them off, and then limiting our contact with the patient as well as using universal precautions. Identifying our patients will be difficult because most of these patients will show up and they may start to look like they are infected with some type of viral incident or viral contagion, and they pose no threat if they look like a normal person that's having the flu. But these are patients that are very virulent, and they can pose a pretty serious threat to the responders and the communities that they live in. We'll move on to our radiological. Now, in this case, we're definitely looking at some type of blast material, unless it's something that was injected or placed on food to be disseminated. Most dissemination of these type of nuclear or radiological contaminants, usually as a result of some type of IED or some type of nuclear type device. And we're looking at these chemicals being dispersed. As they're dispersed, the radiological product emits this energy, and this energy is harmful and deadly to rapidly evolving cells. And so those are from the first cells that we tend to see that are affected, your hair, the GI tract, these kind of cells that turn over quickly. What we're looking at, though, as far as radiological, we have alpha and beta. So these alpha and beta ones are the more detrimental ones to our patients and our rescuers, gamma being the least. And it all depends on timing of exposure, the amount of time of the exposure, and how close and the route of exposure. So, timing and shielding is everything. If we can shield ourselves from it, and if we can limit the time of exposure, we limit the amount of radiation that we pick up. Again, it goes back to a nuclear device or improvised explosive device. We're looking at blast categories then. And we have our blast categories. Our first, the barrel trauma. Second, we're looking at the whatever shrapnel being thrown. We're looking at the patient being thrown as the tertiary and quaternary blast is anything else that the patient has been struck upon, or anything else that is falling debris onto the patient. Now we just add in a radiological contaminant, and we're looking at a very serious, large number of patients that we're dealing with.